All right, I'm Rachel Schick, and I'm going to introduce our project. But first, we're going to introduce the other people of our group. So go ahead.
My name's Tia Motioner.
And I'm Alazar Musi.
Awesome. So for our presentation on the ethical decision-making process, we are going to first read the scenario that we decided to use, and then we'll go into the steps. And just for reference, the reason why we highlighted certain parts of this was just to outline the most important parts we thought of while processing and analyzing the situation. So this is scenario 2. So John is a counseling intern working for an outpatient facility that specializes in alcohol and drug addiction recovery. John has been interning with a facility for 9 months. He is particularly involved in co-leading many of the groups at the facility and has gotten to know many of the clients. Overall, John really likes most of the clients at the center. One evening, while checking his email, he notices a friend request for his personal Facebook account. John recognizes the email as originating from Ben, one of the clients at the center. John has enjoyed his interactions with Ben, so he grants Ben his request. A few days later, Janine, another client at the center, emails John with her request to befriend John on Facebook. John is not as fond of Janine because she is often argumentative in the group. John decides to deny the request, explaining to Janine he does not befriend women. So I'm going to start with step 1, which is identifying the problem of the scenario. So there's a few key things that are going on here. First, obviously, John is an intern. So before he should have done anything, he should have consulted his supervisor because, you never know. So he should have done that first. And then also one of the most important things is also he was accepting a friend request from a client. So first and foremost, that's not, which we're going to outline in the code of ethics about how you're not supposed to do that. But that was another problem related to it. And then not only was he biased towards the different clients, he also was deceptive about his reasoning, meaning he lied to the woman and saying he didn't want to accept her friend request because she was a woman, but really he didn't like her. So those are a few of the reasons that we found through it. And the bias in these problems are not just situational problems. They could also be problems in the future if he has a sort of mindset with having a fixed mindset of this person or the client. So those are just a few of the problems that we found through the scenario, and Alex is going to introduce the code of ethics.
So one thing, as we were going through these, codes and different principles, we did think that these are definitely ethical. Like, it's an ethical issue, a professional issue, but also it could potentially be legal. It's not clear. It would depend, but you'll see here that there is a long list of ACA ethical codes and state codes, and we chose the state of Georgia. So on this list, this is just more of a full list of all the ACA codes and Georgia state codes broken down. In the following slides, I'm going to show and highlight strictly the codes that would have applied had he considered prior to making the mistake. And so first is A4A, avoiding harm. Counselors act to avoid harming their clients, trainees, and research participants, and to minimize or to remedy unavoidable or unanticipated harm. So that one, I just wanted to read that one out loud because I think as counselors, we're working with people who are, that are seeking help. They're in a sensitive and fragile state. And so, and maybe not necessarily fragile, but their hearts and their minds are open and vulnerable. And so we want to be very careful about that. And so no matter what, harm can happen in any form, whether intentional or unintentional, and we just really got to be cautious. That doesn't mean, our actions are unethical, but we do need to evaluate ourselves step by step. And it's about what steps we take. And so John did a couple of things here. He did pursue, as you can see, A5E, a personal virtual relationship with a current client who is one of the clients, right? And so Ben, And technically, we are prohibited from engaging in personal virtual relationships with individuals who we have a current counseling relationship. That includes, friending someone on social media. And in our book in chapter 9, it very clearly states that we can't friend people. C1 talks about C1 and C2E. Addresses having, like as counselors, we should be aware of, the ACA Code of Ethics and applicable laws and regulations, and we should refer to it and take reasonable steps to consult with other counselors about, as well as referring to those things. In order, again, as professionals, so that we can do our job excellently. And so those are two things he didn't do. We don't see that in this scenario. And so additionally, F1A, client welfare, this is in reference to his, him as an intern. His supervisor is technically in charge of his actions, right? As a matter of fact, if anything comes up out of this, not only will John be liable, but so will his clinical supervisor. And that's because the clinical supervisor is responsible for monitoring the services that the supervisee is fulfilling. And so that's something that he needs to be aware of as well. His actions will harm not only himself, and not only his client, but also his supervisor. H4B, professional boundaries and distance counseling. Counselors understand the necessity of maintaining a professional relationship with their clients. And again, it goes on to talk about those boundaries. And then the last slide, we'll have our last three. The H6B, social media as part of informed consent. Counselors clearly explain to their clients as part of their informed consent procedure the benefits, limitations, and boundaries of the use of social media. And so if there was a policy, he could have referred to it prior, right? And of course, there is no excuse, as I1A and IB 1B state. Counselors are required to know the ACA codes, and so because they ought to know it, they ought to implement ethical decision-making process as we're doing now after the fact, prior. So we all should be taking steps before we make any decisions that could be, again, harmful to others, harmful to ourselves. Then there is we chose Georgia. That's where Tia's from, her home state, and we got to pull it from their website, a few of the codes that we thought were applicable. It's Rule 135.7.01, responsibility to clients, which includes unprofessional conduct, includes but is not limited to the following: participating in dual relationships with clients that create a conflict of interest, which could impair the licensee's professional judgment, harm the client, or compromise the therapy. It doesn't mean all three. It could have just been one, and this was potentially harmful to the client. And I say harmful to Gene specifically because his actions were his excuse was discriminatory, and it could be harmful to Ben because again, there's things that he could, by friending him, there's information he may gain about his counselor, about this current supervisee, John, that may come back to haunt him later. And so Rule 135.7.02, integrity: the licensee shall act in accordance with the highest standards of professional integrity and competence. The licensee is honest, keyword honest, in dealing with clients, students, trainees, colleagues, and the public. The licensee seeks to eliminate incompetence or dishonesty from the profession. And I think we can all three of us can say that John was definitely dishonest. And then unprofessional conduct includes, but is not limited to, practicing inhumane or discriminatory treatment toward any person or group of persons. And we thought it was really risky that he used the reason that he doesn't friend women. And as a counselor, if he's counseling women, friending women seems very out of character, right? And And again, it was just unreasonable. And so it seems very discriminatory. And the last codes is Rule 135.7.04, 1 and 2 with C and D. The licensee respects the rights and responsibilities of professional colleagues, and as the employee of an organization remains accountable as an individual to the ethical principles of the profession. The licensee treats colleagues with respect and good faith and relates to the clients of the colleagues with full professional consideration. And I mentioned this because the supervisee has a supervisor that he has to defer to and does not consider how this could harm this supervisor. And so professional conduct includes but is not limited to when a supervisee is unlicensed, failing to inform the supervisee of the legal limitations on unlicensed practice. And then B, when a supervisor is aware that a supervisee is engaging in any unethical, unprofessional, or deleterious conduct, failing to provide the supervisee with a forthright evaluation and appropriate recommendations regarding such practice. And so those are the Georgia codes that we thought could apply. And now we're going to move on to step 3. Yeah.
Yeah, so when looking at all the counseling principles, a lot of these weren't followed either. He wasn't avoiding actions that caused harm. He wasn't following justice. He wasn't treating them equally, fostering fairness, as we already talked about. Fidelity, he wasn't, honoring their commitments and keeping promises and including fulfilling one's responsibilities within the professional relationship. As we already mentioned, he wasn't being professional. He wasn't, dealing truthfully with the individuals who he, came into professional contact with. And then we looked at this article called The Challenging of Friending. And the author of this article said that complications could arise should a client seek information about the therapist online or pursue a relationship on Facebook or via other social networks. On one hand, denying a client's invitation could potentially lead to feelings of rejection and abandonment. But on the other hand, approving friend requests from clients and allowing them access to sensitive personal information could lead to the development of dual relationships, which, as we know, is a code of ethics. And then we found this video. It's called Sample Social Media Policy for Therapists. And we're just going to play a little bit of it. And it talks about all of that.
Plan. So there are some guidelines that we need to make sure we follow with our social media policies, but some of it is a little bit open-ended. So here are some categories that I suggest you consider addressing in your social media policy. First, it's helpful to remind clients why you have this policy to begin with, which the main reason is for their own privacy. Just a reminder, these platforms are not HIPAA secure. So therefore, it's not appropriate to exchange any sort of private professional messages with your clients through these social media platforms. Number 2, distinguish between personal and professional accounts. So if you have both a personal presence and a business presence on social media, you need to let clients know how your policies differ for each of these. Number 3, friending and following policy. Be clear about how you respond or not if a current or former client attempts to friend or follow you on social media. Number 4, address public conversation. Let your clients know that you do everything you can to protect their privacy should they interact with you publicly, such as leaving a comment on your Instagram post. So personally, I let clients know that if they do opt to interact with me on my business social media page, I will either not respond at all, or if I do offer any kind of response, it will not acknowledge any other information. It won't acknowledge that I know them, that they're my client, or anything along those lines. So basically, it interacts with.
Awesome. So yeah, that video talks a lot about, how there are sometimes unavoidable relationships, but when we inform our clients, that can help a lot. And finding the purpose of the policy and distinguishing, personal versus professional within social media, as well as, the friending and following policy. If we just inform our clients right away, a lot of that will just be simplified and will not have to be an issue. And then really quick, before I go into biblical principles, we also looked at an article called Social Media and Counseling, Opportunities, Risks, and Ethical Considerations. And this author also talked about how traditionally clients know little about their therapists outside of the consulting room, but complications can arise should a client seek information about the therapist online or pursue a relationship on Facebook or other social networks. Young clients may easily send an email or text with details or post a friend request on their counselor's Facebook page. But psychotherapists must explore their own feelings, wishes, as well as the counter reactions of the client. So then when we talk about the biblical principles, these are some, not all, of biblical principles that we found. We looked at Luke 6:31, do not do to others as you would have not done to have them do to you. Ephesians 4:2, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. I feel like the counselor in this situation was not being, completely humble, gentle, and patient, because he was being judgmental, saying, well, she acts this way in group and I don't like that. And, putting that in your mindset is not being gentle, and, that's not showing love. Colossians 3:12 says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And the same thing, like I just said, like he was not really showing that. In the textbook, Daniel, he referred to Luke 10:30-37, and it talks about how he records the story of Jesus being challenged by an expert in the law regarding the responsibility to extend God's love to others. And so in response, Jesus unfolded this parable in Luke 30-37, and he says, in reply, a man was going down from Jerusalem in Jericho. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out his 2 denarii and gave them to an innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise.
Okay, so for the next step of the decision-making model, we're going to go through some potential courses of action that we all came up with. Like I said in the guide, it said to really just like brainstorm a bunch of stuff. So any possible thing you could think of. So that's kind of what we all did. We all came up with different options. And course of action we thought would be beneficial. So yeah, one option is, leave it alone. Don't make the same mistake again. So just maybe move on from that. That was just one option we came up with. And one consequence for that is that, yes, it could break the trust with the other client, meaning, maybe she, obviously if you leave it alone, from him lying to her, well, she didn't know that he was lying to her, but anyways, that he said that about her, like, you're a woman, so I'm not going to befriend you. That could potentially have harmed her. And so not reconciling or doing anything to go back to saying to her, that could have maybe harmed that relationship in some sort of way. So that's a consequence for that option. And then next, so unfriending the first client, which was Ben, and then informing him of the unfriending, possibly, just to be clear about how, it goes against the policies. And so he could just unfriend him, and, maybe he won't know, but hopefully he might. So that is also a consequence, is that he may realize that he was unfriended and maybe wonder why, ask questions, maybe he even ask questions while they're in counseling or in the group setting, and maybe she overhears, so the woman that was hurt in the scenario. So that's also another possibility of just the relationship being broken in some sort of way, in that trust, especially if he's a client, he might not understand why. He doesn't know the code of ethics, so he might not understand why John decided to unfriend him in the first place. So that's also another consequence for that option. And then another option we have, which is unfriending the first client, which we said, but then also explaining why he did that, and then explaining to the woman why he didn't friend her, and apologizing to her for lying about it, and attempting to reconcile with her. Again, with this one, maybe it could go well and it could not harm her or hurt her in some way. But I think if he actually explains, no one wants to hear that they're argumentative and that you don't like them. So I think if he explains that to her, it's probably not going to go well. So that's also just a consequence of that. She may eventually decide to leave the counseling and not come back, or maybe never go to counseling again. So there could be lots of just building consequences that could happen from him doing this. So we have many more options. We got lots of choices. It's great. Okay. Another option, which is probably the most important, is consulting with the supervisor or another leader, since he wasn't the only leader there, and what to do, because it says it's important as counselors to consult with our colleagues, and most importantly, obviously the supervisor he should go to first, but also other colleagues, and recorded document actions taken. And throughout all of these, it's going to be really important, as I'm learning, and the rest of us are learning as well, about consulting and documenting. And I feel like communication is just a huge aspect of all of this. So that's really important with that option. And then with that, a consequence of that would be the clinical supervisor or any of his colleagues could possibly report him to the ACA, and he could get in other trouble. So that's a consequence of that option. And then next, which is a combination of two of our courses of action. So yes, updating the informed consent policy, which was kind of already mentioned in that video, which was really helpful, about communicating to the clients that, hey, this is just our policy. If maybe after counseling is over, or they decide to friend them or something in the future, that's just their policy that they have, just to maintain those proper boundaries. And that with this this problem that happened, the clients who are involved, or anybody, could also they have the option, or they're allowed to report this person to the ACA board if they feel the need to. So that's also, I feel like that really just shows that you're just being humble, and you're not trying to hide, or you're really having him own up to his mistakes that happen. So that is the option. And then consequence obviously could be the same thing, of being reported to the ACA anyways. So that is that option. I think that's the other one, right, Alex? That's the last one. Yes. So those are our options that we had. And obviously it's good, like I already mentioned, come up with a bunch of options, and then we're going to decide what the best course of action was out of all those options.
Yeah. And which is, of course, option 5. There's no way to avoid the consequences. That's why, other than not doing the things that would result in something troublesome. And so, but the best course of action here is not for just the sake of the counselor's benefit, but of course for the sake of the client. We want to make sure all the clients are healthy and continue to pursue counseling and their own health, especially because it is a recovery clinic for those who are struggling with addiction. And so We believe that the best course of action will begin first with consulting with the clinical supervisor and or group co-leader. Second, refer to the ACA codes, state codes, and informed consent policy for further guidance. Update that I put the IC, but it's informed consent policy if necessary, if it doesn't include the friending policy, because we want to make sure we prevent this situation in the future. And of course, like the ACA states, being knowledgeable from that day forward, right? From that point forward about the codes and policies will help keep you from making those very simple mistakes. And so then third was the documenting the full boundary extension and situation, and continue to update once you meet with the client. That way, if you have this, it'll only protect you. Because again, we don't know if this will go to court, but it's best to have these records at hand. And then lastly, take appropriate steps to admit mistakes to the client and reconcile. And so you're going to want to be honest, right? Say, hey, to both, right? Ben, hey, I'm so sorry. I friended you. This was not the appropriate thing for me to do. I want to set that boundary. And he may not even need to unfriend him. He could also just, he can just communicate like, hey, I'm going to have to create that boundary. I may not be able to interact with you, because I think that's something that was in that video that was, we saw it earlier, saying, I'm going to limit my interaction with you. And just so because of this, and this, that's possible. And again, drawing a new line so that in the future, you're not friending people. And then of course, apologizing to Gene and saying, hey, this is a mistake that I made. I wasn't, whether being honest or not honest, like it's important to just say, hey, I made a mistake, and I would like to make this, work. And I want, like to show you that I value you, and really meaning to, hey, I'm going to do the work in myself, because according to my faith, I need to be patient and kind and humble. And one scripture that I wasn't able to add there was the one about not judging our enemy or judging others, especially considering the speck in our eye. And so, yeah, now I'm gonna pass this on to Tia for our reflection.
Yeah, so we had a lot of takeaways from this. Overall, we kind of talked about it, and we were like, we're really glad we got to do this, because we feel like we took a lot of time, and like this is something that we can look back at, because we looked at every single aspect into this situation, and that's probably what we're gonna have to do one day. And even like the faith aspect, like that's super important to look into as Christians. And so it'll be something that I mean, we talked about it, something that we all will definitely look back at and keep. But our biggest takeaways were just, when in doubt, consult. Make sure you're consulting with your clients. And as an intern, John should have been more careful, because his actions reflect, not only himself, but also his supervisor, because he is under his supervisor during this time. Another thing that we took away from this is just making sure that we keep really good records and being proactive rather than reactive. Know your codes and your policies so that you don't make these, simple mistakes. But yeah, overall, I think we all can agree on that. This was a very informative and, really, really good project that we had to do. And I'm thankful we got to do it. So
yeah,
that is all we have.
Thank you. And I'm going to just show this works cited page.
Yes.
And you'll see it, of course, up close and personal when we submit it. But thank you. Have an awesome day.